There are mornings that begin with the smell of coffee and end with a truth no one wants to face. The night's rain had stretched into early morning, each heavy drop pounding against the windshield of an old beat-up Ford parked in front of a small diner named Sunrise Diner Num 28. A man stepped out of the car, salt and pepper hair, unshaven stubble. Wearing a faded flannel jacket, he looked like a retired long-haul trucker. But what no one knew was that he owned the entire chain of restaurants. Derek Langston, CEO of Sunrise Restaurant Group, wasn't here for breakfast. He was here to find out why a branch that seemed to be running well had the highest turnover rate in the entire system. Why the staff at this location consistently received alarmingly low internal review scores, and why the reports from the manager Doug Henderson always looked so polished it was suspicious. 7:30 a.m. Rush hour for breakfast. Derek pulled his cap lower, adjusted his black-rimmed glasses, and softly repeated the role he had rehearsed so carefully: Walt Simmons, retired truck driver. Passing through town to visit his daughter, no one recognized him. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Inside the diner, the air was warm with the scent of bacon, pancakes, and coffee. But beneath that inviting layer was something strange. The hostess greeted him with tired eyes, no smile, no small talk like the training manual insisted. The Employee of the Month plaque still displayed the name from August, even though it was already mid-October. Every small detail, the unmopped corner of the floor, the wrinkled menus, the crooked picture frame, were silent signals Derek had learned to read over his 30 years in the industry. But it was when he sat at the table near the kitchen with a perfect view of the entire service station that the strange began to unfold. 2 male employees stood chatting by the coffee station, each serving only 2 tables. Meanwhile, a young woman, her name tag read Cassie Taylor, was juggling twice as many tables, balancing 3 plates on one arm, pouring coffee with the other, and still managing to smile. She wasn't perfect, but she was real and tired. When Cassie approached his table and poured his first cup of coffee, Derek stayed fully in character, but then one unexpected sentence made him freeze mid-scoop of sugar into his porcelain cup. Breakfast shift's the worst. Tips almost never make it to me, especially when only a few people are allowed to run the register. She spoke softly, as if she was used to being ignored, and she had no idea the man sitting in front of her was her CEO. Derek set down his spoon, his gaze lingering behind the black-rimmed glasses on Cassie's strained smile. He came here for breakfast, but now he realized something was rotting inside the very system he had built, and he couldn't leave, not until he uncovered the whole truth. Cassie walked away to serve another table, leaving Derek in a silence heavy with reflection. In front of him sat a strong, aromatic cup of coffee poured by someone slowly being worn down by a system that was supposed to protect her. Derek watched her, the only server moving, as if time was never on her side. She weaved between tables, always making eye contact with guests, placing glasses within easy reach, folding napkins neatly. Her demeanor was effortless and in stark contrast to her 2 co-workers, Ryan and Jason, who leaned against the counter, laughing without a care. A family with a small child walked in and was led by the hostess straight to Cassie's section, even though Ryan's area had open tables. Derek took note, over and over again. A clear pattern emerged. Cassie was assigned more tables, worked harder, but never touched the register. Every time a guest from her section stood up to leave, Ryan or Jason just happened to be nearby and swiped the card. Then Cassie returned, carrying the trucker's delight, the meal he had ordered. 3 perfectly cooked eggs, crispy bacon, golden pancakes, everything exactly by the company's training standards. "Here you go, sir," Cassie said as she placed the plate down, maintaining a soft smile. "Thank you. Very professional." Derek nodded. He took a few bites, then casually tested the waters. "Looks like a busy morning for you. I've seen you running twice as much as everyone else." Cassie froze for a brief second. Her eyes darted quickly toward the counter where Doug Henderson, the branch manager, was standing. He wasn't watching customers, only employees. Especially Cassie. Probably just how the sections got assigned. She replied quietly, then quickly slipped back into the kitchen. Derek frowned. Doug, the man he had once trusted enough to hand over one of the company's largest branches, was standing there laughing with Ryan. He didn't look like someone managing a packed breakfast shift. Not a single glance toward the customers, only mockery aimed at Cassie. The atmosphere in the restaurant wasn't just inefficient. It was being manipulated by something else, something invisible, but cold. Something that made a young woman bow her head, work twice as hard as the others, and stay silent, afraid to speak up. Derek rested his elbows on the table, feeling the mask of Walt growing heavier by the minute. He couldn't just sit here pretending to be a passing customer while an entire scheme of fraud played out before his eyes. Cassie returned to refill his coffee, and Derek decided to try again. "And the tips, I assume at least you get your fair share." This time, she hesitated. Her hand tightened slightly around the coffee pot, a muscle in her wrist tensing. "Morning shifts aren't great, especially when not everyone's allowed to handle the register." Her voice was low, almost a whisper. Derek was about to ask more, but Cassie had to rush off again, another table waving for service. He watched her go, his eyes following the steps of the young woman who was carrying the chaos of the entire morning on her slender shoulders. He took a sip of coffee, now cold, but inside, what was boiling was a fury he could barely contain, and he knew he couldn't walk away with just a receipt. When the meal was nearly finished and only a sip of coffee remained, Derek looked up just as Cassie passed by. He raised his cup slightly, signaling for a refill. She returned almost instantly, the coffee pot still half full in her hand. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" Cassie asked, the smile still on her lips but a trace of weariness showing in her eyes. "Just the check, and if you're not too busy, a minute to talk," Derek replied honestly, like a father scoping out a place his daughter might soon call home. "My girl's thinking about moving to this area. I want to make sure it's somewhere a young person can really live." Cassie paused, then nodded. "I'll bring your check right out." A few minutes later, She returned, and Derek noticed her tuck a small notebook into the front pocket of her apron. That little detail made him smile faintly. She was smart enough to pretend she was taking an order so no one would question her lingering at a stranger's table. "Your daughter will probably enjoy the peace and quiet here," Cassie began, trying to keep her voice steady. "I hope so. But what matters most is she's treated right." Derek looked up, locking eyes with Cassie, letting his gaze carry an unspoken message. "I see the injustice you're enduring." Cassie glanced around, then leaned in slightly. "This place wasn't always as bad as it is now." Derek Neuche. She took a deep breath, then slowly began to untangle the knots, as if it was the first time someone had truly listened. "It used to be that everyone split the tips cash and card, but ever since Doug became manager, he changed how tables are assigned. Only the chosen ones get to handle credit card payments. The rest of us, like me, have to take cash and wait until the end of the day for our share." She let out a dry laugh. "And guess what? It never gets shared." "Do you keep records?" Derek asked, his voice now sharper. Cassie nodded. "Every shift, every check, every digital tip shown in the system versus what I actually received. I've lost over $600 just this month. I've got proof, but I don't know who to send it to." Derek clenched his hand beneath the table. He knew exactly why her complaints hadn't reached corporate. In the system, the person who approved terminations and handled internal grievances was none other than Ryan Henderson, Doug's nephew. "Then why don't you quit?" Derek asked, though he already knew the answer. Cassie lowered her head slightly. "Because I need the money. I'm in my final year of accounting. Just a few more months. If I quit, I won't be able to pay next month's tuition." The air turned still. Cassie straightened her posture, her voice lower, firmer. "I'm not asking for pity. I just want a fair workplace. A place where my effort isn't stolen behind pretty-looking reports and fraud dressed as policy." The kitchen door clicked open. Cassie glanced back. Doug was walking out. "I have to get back. I hope your daughter finds a better place to work than this." She left before Derek could say anything more. He watched her go, that small figure weaving between tables, still pouring coffee, still smiling at guests as if she had never said a word. He placed a $20 bill on the table, then quietly tucked another beneath the coffee cup, angled just enough for Cassie to find it. Derek rose, stepped out into the sound of the door chime. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside him was just beginning. And it wouldn't just sweep through one branch. Derek entered the meeting room at the Lakeside Hotel with cold eyes and hands no longer trembling from anger but from resolve. Mara Jenkins, head of internal investigations for Sunrise Group, was already waiting. She didn't need a long explanation. One look at Derek's face was enough to understand. "I need you to pull the entire POS history, staff scheduling, internal complaints, and security footage from diner number 28 for the past 6 months, Derek said, skipping greetings, skipping pleasantries, immediately, and strictly confidential. No one can know I was ever there." Mara nodded and signaled to 2 team members, Luis and Tanya, to get to work. In less than 90 minutes, The first laptop lit up with rows of data that made Derek feel the blood rush to his temples just from glancing at it. Mara pointed to an odd column on the timesheet. Doug created a new classification: auxiliary server, assistant server. This category doesn't exist in the official Sunrise operations manual. Once someone is flagged with this tag, the POS system automatically excludes them from receiving digital tips. All tips are rerouted to the primary POS operator, the designated lead for that shift. "Let me guess," Derek said, jaw tightening slightly. "Ryan, exactly. 67% of all tip-included transactions over the last 6 months were deposited into the account of employee ID RH274, Ryan Henderson. The remaining portion was split between 3 others, and every single one of them is part of Doug's inner circle." Luis pulled up a clip from the security cameras, a midday shift. Doug stood in front of the cash box, counting out stacks of bills. There was no sound, but the body language said it all. Doug handed out separate stacks to different people. Ryan received the largest stack. When Cassie approached and asked something, Doug waved her off. Ryan laughed out loud. "We couldn't capture audio, but..." Luis switched to another screen, based on POS tip reports and payroll records. Just on that day alone, there were $847 in card tips, but only $420 was distributed to staff. Nearly half of it vanished, Derek asked. "Exactly. And what's even more disturbing, that money was funneled into a so-called cooperation expense sent to an account under the name Douglas Henderson LLC, a company Doug created shortly after becoming manager," Mara said. Tanya handed over another folder. "And this is the part that's even worse. In 6 months, there have only been 3 official complaints. All of them were marked as resolved internally." "Who handled them?" Derek asked, though he already knew the answer. "Ryan," Tanya replied, pointing to the signature on the file. "Nephew and assistant manager." Mara opened another document called transcripts from 6 former employees who were contacted for verification. 5 of them confirmed the same thing: anyone who questioned the tip distribution was retaliated against, moved to the worst shifts, or removed from high-potential sections. "What about Cassie?" Mara asked quietly. "She doesn't dare quit." Tanya answered for her. "Because of school. Because she's the only one holding things together at home." Derek leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if trying to escape the nausea rising in his chest. Everything Cassie said was true. But more than that, she wasn't alone. The entire system was being manipulated. This wasn't just ethical failure. It was coordinated fraud. Luis spoke up. "We've got enough to terminate them immediately. The question is, how do you want to proceed?" Derek stood. Turning to the window, the rain had stopped, but the sky was still blanketed in grey. "I don't just want them fired. I want everyone in the company to know if you steal someone else's sweat, one day you'll have to answer for it, to their face." He turned back, his eyes flashing like lightning through a storm-dark sky Friday morning. Peak hours, right at that restaurant. "We're not hiding anything, and I'll be the one to end this game in front of every employee and customer there." Mara looked at him, then gave a slow, firm nod. Bold, but right. I'll handle the rest, Mara said. Derek looked down at the folder again, his eyes landing on the image of Cassie, the young woman pointing at the tip jar like a lone warrior. He whispered, "Just a few more days, Cassie, and no one will dare steal your hard work without paying the price." Thursday, the day before the truth would be revealed. Derek stood in front of the hotel mirror, carefully adjusting every detail of his appearance. The beard remained, but this time, instead of a wrinkled shirt and faded jeans, he wore a bright flannel, fresh jeans, and a clean pair of shoes just polished enough to look like a returning customer with a bit more money than last time. Walt Simmons, round 2, but this time he wasn't going in alone. "You sure about this?" Mara asked from behind, now wearing glasses and holding a book, playing the role of Walt's daughter. "Absolutely. Today, we're not here for pancakes. We're here to drag their game right onto the stage." They walked into Sunrise Diner at exactly 8:15 a.m., just as the breakfast rush began. The door chime rang. Cassie was pouring coffee when she looked up, stunned. Walt Derek offered a warm smile. "Came back for your pancakes. And this is my daughter, Mara. I talked about this place so much, I convinced her to come try it." Cassie looked genuinely pleased for a moment, but then her eyes dimmed. She glanced over at the counter where Doug was standing beside Ryan. Doug's gaze was sharp as a blade, and he had seen everything. "Unfortunately, I'm not serving this section today. Doug has a policy: returning guests get assigned to different servers for varied experience." "That's a strange policy," Mara chimed in, her voice light as air but sharp as steel. "Well, as long as the coffee's good, I won't complain." Cassie nodded slightly. She sensed something was off, but couldn't quite place it. She poured coffee for both of them, then quickly walked away. A few minutes later, Ryan strolled over, relaxed as ever. "Good morning, folks. I'm Ryan. I'll be taking care of you today. Cassie said she already served your coffee, so let's go ahead and place your order. I'll have the Grand Slam just like last time." Derek smiled. "And you?" Miss Ryan turned to Mara. "Sunny side-up eggs and toast," Mara replied shortly, eyes glued to her phone, which was actually running a secure recording system developed by the legal team. Ryan nodded, jotted it down, and continued with his usual small talk. But when Derek casually asked, "Oh, by the way, I heard there's a new loyalty card program," Ryan's eyes lit up. "Absolutely 5% off, and you can preload money. Super convenient for regulars." Derek slowly pulled out his wallet and took out the special card, one the Sunrise Tech team had encoded with a unique tracking ID. "I just registered online. Can I pay with this?" "Perfect," Ryan said enthusiastically as he took the card, completely unaware that the trap had been set. The entire meal unfolded like a carefully staged play. Derek and Mara observed every detail. Cassie still handled more tables, still wasn't allowed near the payment terminal. Ryan cruised through the easier section and was always the last one to touch the POS, the electronic payment device. The meal ended. Derek spoke slowly. "I'd like to leave a $50 tip. Service was excellent." Ryan raised his eyebrows, surprised, but clearly thrilled. "Thank you so much," "Sir, I assume everyone here splits tips evenly." "Right?" Derek asked, deliberately locking eyes with Ryan. A flicker, just a moment of hesitation, but enough to reveal a crack. "Of course, we divide everything at the end of each shift." Ryan inserted the card into the machine. That single action was the linchpin. The moment they stepped outside, the data from the POS system was transmitted directly to the investigation team back at Lakeside. Mara leaned in toward Derek and whispered, "If Cassie's story checks out, then that card swipe was the sugar-coated bullet." Derek nodded. "We just held up a mirror to a thief, and he has no idea." The mirror recorded everything. Friday morning, no more rain, but the air carried a strange chill, not from weather, but from anticipation. At exactly 8:45 a.m., 3 black SUVs silently pulled up to the curb in front of Sunrise Diner number 28. No sirens, no chaos, yet every employee and customer inside instinctively looked up. Cassie was mid-pour when she froze. A ripple of unease crawled down her spine as the door swung open. First came 2 men and a middle-aged woman in suits carrying tablets and files. Then an older woman with silver hair and a purposeful stride. And finally, the man she once knew as Walt Simmons. But now, Walt was no longer the folksy man in a baseball cap with a friendly southern drawl. He wore a charcoal grey tailored suit, standing tall with an icy stare, the commanding presence of a man who could shut down a 100-restaurant chain with a single phone call. Cassie dropped the coffee pot. Doug, emerging from the office, froze when he locked eyes with the man standing at the center of the diner. "Mr. Langston," he stammered, his face going pale. We weren't notified of your visit." "Of course not," Derek replied coolly. "Because if I had, you would have cleaned up every trace." The investigation team quickly spread out, each taking a station: the register, the kitchen, the exits. Mara, now in a dark suit and wearing an earpiece, signaled to security to monitor all exits. The diner fell into absolute silence. Derek stepped forward into the center of the room like a general on a battlefield. "Apologies for the interruption. Dear guests, I'm Derek Langston, CEO of Sunrise Restaurant Group. We are conducting an urgent audit concerning suspected internal fraud." Customers looked around in confusion. Employees stood frozen. Derek turned to Doug Henderson and Ryan Henderson. "Please step forward." The uncle and nephew exchanged glances, trying to maintain composure. Ryan even attempted a nervous smile. "There must be some kind of misunderstanding. We've always followed protocol." 18,742.63. Derek cut him off. "That's the amount you and your nephew have stolen in employee tips over the past 3 months. He held up a file handed to him by Mara on a tablet. On the screen, itemized digital tip records, security footage of illicit cash distributions, and most recently the $50 tip from yesterday's loyalty card transaction, deposited under employee ID RH274 Ryan, despite the table being served by Cassie. Ryan's face went white. Doug tried to salvage the moment. "We've developed our own internal incentive model." "It's not a model," Derek interrupted. "It's an organized theft system. You created a separate company account to reroute funds, programmed a sub-staff tag to block tip allocations, buried complaints, and retaliated against anyone who dared speak up. And the worst part is that you thought you'd never be caught." He turned to Cassie, who stood silently at the counter, tears brimming in her eyes. "I came here just to have breakfast, but what I received was the truth, from someone who's been crushed for far too long." Derek looked out at the gathered staff, some holding their breath, others with hands over their mouths. Then he spoke, firmly and clearly, effective immediately. "Doug and Ryan Henderson are permanently terminated from Sunrise Restaurant Group. Their case files will be forwarded to law enforcement. The stolen funds will be repaid in full." Doug tried to fight back. "You can't do this. I built this branch from the ground up." Derek looked him dead in the eyes. "No. You inherited a strong team and a solid system. And you betrayed both. The people who built this place are the ones behind the counter, with grease on their hands and aching feet. Not the man punching numbers and printing fake reports." 2 security personnel stepped forward. Doug and Ryan were escorted out under the stunned gazes of staff, not out of fear, but awe. For the first time, someone from the top was standing up for them. In public, Cassie stepped forward, eyes still wet with tears. You're not really." "Walt." Derek softened, his voice gentle and slow. "No, but everything I saw and everything you did was real, and that was what mattered most." The air inside Sunrise Diner felt thick, as if time had frozen in place. Doug and Ryan were held near the counter's corner, guarded by 2 staff security members, no handcuffs, no public accusations, but the looks from their former co-workers weighed heavier than any court sentence. Derek walked to the register, where Mara was standing beside a tablet already synced with a temporary projector on the white wall behind the bar. One tap. The data lit up. "This is a detailed transaction report from the POS system over the past 3 months, Derek said, his voice steady and firm, like a hammer striking steel. "Total digital tips received at this branch, 42,391 pounds. Of that amount, just over 50% was properly distributed to the actual service staff." He tapped again. A breakdown appeared: employee names, ID numbers, and amounts received. And here is the one who claimed the largest share, RH274, Ryan Henderson, with a total of £14,218.59. All eyes turned toward Ryan, who stood pale, completely drained of color. "And this is Cassie Taylor," Derek said, tapping the screen again. The server, who handled twice the number of tables, worked night shifts, and received the most customer compliments. Her total tips, £2,063.15. A silence stretched across the room, tight as a pulled string. "So where did the rest go?" Derek turned to Doug. "We investigated. A portion was internally transferred to an account under the name Douglas Henderson LLC, a legal entity Doug created to legitimize misappropriated funds." Doug's face turned red with anger. That's an off-payroll incentive, a private partnership between me and the company. The company has never signed any contract with an entity by that name. Mara replied firmly and clearly. And within the system, Doug was never authorized to implement any internal tip-sharing initiative. The creation of the auxiliary server category violates company policy. Derek no longer bothered to look at Doug. He turned instead to the staff still gathered in a tense semicircle, a mixture of fear, confusion, and a glimmer of hope. We also contacted 6 former employees who left this branch in the past 6 months. 5 of them confirmed they were pushed into the worst shifts, the lowest traffic areas, and were denied access to the POS system, all right after they dared to ask about tips. And why didn't any of these complaints reach the regional board? Mara asked loudly, not waiting for a reply. She displayed the next image, 3 formal complaints, all bearing the approval signature of Ryan Henderson, bypassing every other level of management. Derek stepped closer to Cassie, the only person who had yet to say a word. She stood with both hands clenched, her eyes red but steady. "Cassie," he said softly, "why didn't you leave? Why not go somewhere else?" She took a deep breath, then answered, with just one sentence, "Because I still believed someone up there would see." That sentence, clean and sharp, cut straight into the core of everyone in the room. And Derek stood silent for a moment. Then he turned to the entire staff, his voice resolute. "I didn't come here just to fire anyone. I came to declare that the era of silence is over. Starting today, Sunrise Diner number 28 will begin again, with truth, with transparency, and with the respect you should have received a long time ago." A small round of applause broke from the back of the room, then spread. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, like the rhythm of a heart beginning to beat again after being strangled for too long. Doug lowered his head. Ryan offered no more excuses. Both were escorted out of the restaurant, beneath the gaze of the very people they had once called beneath them. But today was the day the balance of power was reset. Doug and Ryan had been gone for barely a minute, but the atmosphere inside the diner had completely shifted. The oppressive weight had lifted, replaced by a silence that felt light. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of people who had finally seen justice take form. Derek didn't head straight to the car. He turned back, standing before every remaining staff member, from dishwashers and cooks to the young hostess, the people whose names had never once appeared in a report. "I know," he began. "What just happened may leave many of you confused. But I didn't come here to shut this diner down. I came here to reopen something more important: trust." He looked at every face, young and old, black and white, weary and wide-eyed, and stopped at Cassie, now standing among her co-workers like a living monument to the truth. "Sunrise won't fall because of the mistakes of a few," he continued. "Sunrise will stand tall because of the ones who dared to speak up, dared to be patient, and dared to believe that decency can survive." He gave a signal to Mara. She stepped forward, holding a large envelope, and began handing out new commitment forms along with login credentials to a newly developed anonymous feedback system. Starting today, Mara announced, every Sunrise employee nationwide will have the right to send feedback directly to corporate bypassing branch managers and regional directors. No one can interfere with or erase your complaints anymore. A hand went up. It was Miles, the head chef. So, people like me who dug disciplined just for speaking out, do we still have a chance? Derek nodded. Not only do you have a chance, you'll receive retraining. Be supported by an entirely new supervisory team. And if you've suffered losses, we'll make that right. Publicly. Then he turned to Cassie. Cassie Taylor, for your honesty, your patience, and your unshakable spirit as of today. You are officially the branch manager of Sunrise Diner number 28. The entire staff erupted into applause this time, loud as thunder. Cassie raised a hand to her mouth. She couldn't speak. She simply nodded quietly as Derek placed a hand on her shoulder. Her eyes were wet, but not with tears of exhaustion. These were the tears of someone who had finally been seen for the first time, after 3 years of nameless work. Derek looked around one last time. This isn't just about Sunrise Diner number 28. This is a warning to all 147 of our branches and to anyone in a position of leadership who's forgotten the core truth. Being a boss isn't about managing numbers. It's about being accountable for every person behind those numbers. He walked toward the door, but didn't leave right away. He paused, locking eyes with everyone in the room. If you've ever stayed silent out of fear, know this: truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It just needs one person brave enough to begin. Cassie did that, and I will protect what she started to the very end. Then he walked out. No background music. No camera crew, no grand soundbite for the evening news. Just a man returning to the place he should have been all along, among the workers who were forgotten, to clean up the mess and restore fairness. And as the SUV pulled away from Sunrise Diner, one thing stayed behind forever: trust. 1 month later, morning sunlight poured through the freshly polished windows of Sunrise Diner number 28, reflecting off the bright tiles and neatly arranged tables. No more flickering lights. No more musty corners forgotten in silence. No more hushed whispers at the register. And no more Cassie with dark circles under her eyes and a faded uniform. In her place now stood Cassie Taylor, the new branch manager. She stepped out from the kitchen with calm confidence, her hair neatly tied back, her uniform crisp and on her collar, a small silver pin shaped like a rising sun. Below it, a word: Manager. Good morning. Mr. Langston, she said as Derek stepped in through the front door. He smiled, nodded to the new front desk host, and let Cassie guide him back to that same old table, the one with the familiar view, where everything had begun. Coffee, Cassie asked. Black? No sugar. You remembered. Derek smiled. How could I forget? She replied, pouring each drop herself, not out of obligation, but as a gesture of gratitude. The atmosphere in the diner today was completely different. Fresh, transparent, orderly but not rigid. On the wall hung a digital table rotation display showing in real time which sections were busiest and who was being assigned fairly. It was an idea Cassie herself had proposed. "How's the new tip-sharing system working?" Derek asked, glancing at the monitor near the bar. "Clean interface, real-time updates," Cassie explained, her voice clear and confident. "Each employee logs in with a personal ID when using the POS. The system automatically records who handles each transaction and transparently distributes tips based on table assignments. No one can override it manually." "And how are the employees responding?" "For the first time in a long time. They smile when they see their paycheck," Cassie replied, smiling herself a smile no longer hidden behind layers of concealer. She handed Derek a document, a drafted training protocol she and Mara had co-developed not just for operational skills, but for professional ethics and company culture. "I sent the demo to headquarters," Cassie said. "They want to pilot it in 10 more branches. You ready to go beyond just Sunrise number 28? Derek asked gently, but pointedly. Cassie paused for a few seconds, then smiled. "I've got 1 semester left to finish my accounting degree, but maybe I've already found my real path. To lead not just by the numbers, but by rebuilding trust." Derek nodded, pride shining quietly in his eyes. Behind the counter, a new employee was being shown the ropes by a veteran staff member. Above them, written on the corner of the whiteboard, was the diner's new slogan, chosen and written by the team themselves. "Respect begins with honesty. Success follows naturally." Derek sat in silence for a while, watching Cassie head back to the kitchen to prepare the new shift schedule. She was no longer someone bearing the weight in silence. She was now the architect of the system and the one trusted to lead it. He whispered to himself, as if speaking to the ghosts of what had once been lost a few months ago. She was just a name buried in reports. Today, she's the mirror for the entire company to look into. From the outside, Sunrise Diner number 28 still looked like the same cozy corner restaurant. But from within, it had become a model not just for a restaurant chain, but for an entire philosophy. Fairness isn't a slogan, it's a structure. 1 week after Cassie officially took her post, Derek convened a private meeting with the entire executive board of Sunrise Restaurant Group. On the projector screen in the company's central conference room was a simple headline from Diner number 28 to the entire system. "We can't allow justice to exist in just one location," Derek said. "It has to be the standard, not a stroke of luck." He announced a sweeping reform plan. A transparent tip-sharing system would be implemented across all 147 branches, with real-time dashboards visible to all staff. And each employee would receive a unique login ID, ensuring no one could process transactions on behalf of someone else without being flagged. Tip distribution data and transaction history would be stored on a secure cloud system, allowing headquarters to monitor everything in real time. And most importantly, an anonymous feedback line would be established. connecting employees directly with the internal investigation unit, bypassing all layers of local and regional management. Derek didn't stop at policy. He hand-selected 10 random branches across the U.S. for unannounced audits over the span of 3 months. The results: 2 branches showed minor management issues. 7 branches met the new standards and received bonuses. And 1 branch in Kansas was caught operating a tip-skimming scheme almost identical to Doug's. The perpetrator was removed within 48 hours. Meanwhile, Cassie, still managing diner number 28, was invited to serve as an internal training advisor, working alongside Mara to build the company's new curriculum, culture of transparency and professional ethics. She wasn't a lecturer. She didn't use slides. She didn't speak in corporate jargon. She simply told her story as someone who had endured, had stayed silent, and had been afraid, until the moment she dared to speak the truth. In team sessions across the country, many employees from other states wept as they listened. "We don't need more motivation," she said. "We just need not to have what we've earned taken from us." Cassie walked up this time, not to pour coffee, not to drop off a bill. She simply sat beside him and placed a printed magazine on the table. The front page of the leading F&B industry journal read, "From Waitress to Reformer: How One Voice Changed 147 Restaurants." Derek looked at the photo, Cassie standing proudly with her new team, beneath a bold sign that read, "Respect begins with honesty. Success follows naturally." He smiled softly. "I never imagined. One cold, rainy morning in New Mexico would change the way I lead." Cassie replied, half joking, half true. "You were just trying to get breakfast. I was just trying to survive." Turns out, both of us were looking for something real. Outside, the sun poured in through the clean glass. Inside, everything felt a little warmer, not just from the coffee, or the service, or the food, but from something that could never be printed on any receipt. Dignity, decency, and the power of one person who refused to stay silent. "I never imagined that an old man in glasses would be the one to change my life," Cassie said with a quiet smile. Derek leaned back, his gaze drifting far. He thought of every face he had seen, the nameless workers in reports, the quiet sighs from behind the kitchen doors, the hands calloused from folding napkins over and over. And no one had ever asked them, "Are you okay today?" Then he whispered, "A company isn't strong because it has the smartest people. It's strong when no one has to hide their humanity just to survive." After the events at diner number 28, Derek made a decision. He stopped giving long speeches at conferences. Instead, he began every leadership training with a true story of one forgotten employee, and a whisper so soft it almost went unheard, yet loud enough to force an entire system to change. He introduced a new policy. Every newly promoted leader at Sunrise must spend at least 3 days undercover as a frontline employee, not to inspect but to experience, not to command but to understand. In a rare television interview, the host asked him, "What made you realize your company needed to change?" Derek didn't talk about the POS system, the finances, or the audit logs. He simply answered, "It was when I sat next to someone no one listened to, and I truly listened. That evening, just before leaving for another branch visit, Derek paused at the front desk. A new employee, hair still faintly green from old dye, was patiently helping an elderly customer learn the new card reader. Derek said nothing. He simply nodded and turned to go. Cassie called out, "Will you come back?" He stopped, didn't turn around, but his voice was clear and warm. "I always come back. Wherever the smallest voice is trying not to be forgotten, I'll be there." The door closed softly behind him. And inside Sunrise Diner number 28, the gears of service kept turning. But this time, there was no more grinding, no more hidden shadows. Only the light of ordinary people who dared to choose what's right, dared to speak up, and dared to believe that kindness is never weakness. There are people who walk into our lives like passing guests, but they leave footprints deeper than those who stay forever. Cassie Taylor never imagined her life would change because of a stranger who simply liked the Trucker's Delight breakfast. She never thought she'd one day lead the very branch that once buried her patience beneath silence, exhaustion, and injustice. But the thing she never imagined happened, not because of a miracle, but because one man with power chose to sit down and listen, and because one woman with no power chose not to stay silent. Today, Cassie is no longer the girl timidly asking for more shifts just to afford tuition. She's the one who redesigned an income distribution system now used by thousands of employees across the country. She's an advisor in the new management training program, where the first question taught is no longer, "What's your monthly target?" but rather, "What have you asked your team this week that wasn't about work?" In what used to be Doug Henderson's office, now transformed into an open team meeting space, one whiteboard still hangs. On it, anyone can write a small wish for themselves or for a colleague. On her first day as manager, Cassie wrote the very first line. "One day, someone will believe in you without needing proof." Derek still continues his unannounced visits. At each place, he doesn't say he's the CEO. He simply asks one small question. Here, who's the one carrying everything in silence? And when he finds them, he stays. Just as he once stayed with Cassie. Just as Cassie now stays beside her new staff. Just as trust once sparked quietly spreads, needing no spotlight, needing no name. If you're working in a place where no one sees your effort, if your work has been quietly taken from you, if you've ever felt like just a name in a massive system, remember this: you matter. You're not invisible. And sometimes all it takes to change everything is one honest voice. You are not invisible. You are not alone. And the truth you carry may be the very thing that changes an entire world. All it takes is for you to speak, and for someone brave enough to truly listen.